You ever play a game and just not understand what the story is trying to tell you? Creating a divide between the narrative and gameplay sections where you can enjoy one but can't make heads or tails of the other? For as long as I've been playing games, I only encountered this once, where at the time I was too young to fully understand the message the game was trying to convey to me, with that game in particular being the somewhat infamous Metal Gear Solid 2. MGS2 has what is easily the weirdest legacy I've ever known in the history of gaming, being a highly anticipated title that blew its predecessor out of the water mechanically, but became universally hated not only for its confusing narrative, but for the fact that the game gave false advertising as to who the player would be playing throughout its narrative. It was a recipe for disaster, as the game fared poorly amongst the initial wave of critics who just didn't get what it was trying to do, which for the early 2000s was the biggest brain narrative a game could tell. Thankfully, in my and many other players' cases, by the time the HD collection rolled around, those trailers influenced our perception of the game less and less, allowing us to enjoy it for what it was. To an extent. Like I said, I couldn't make heads or tails of the story when I finished MGS2 for the first time, and it doesn't help that the game actively lies to you for 7 hours, and by the time you finally learn the truth, it comes at you so relentlessly, it's hard to parse what's being said. Now, that's not to say that I didn't glean anything from the story, as there were a handful of moments with Snake and Snake that I liked a lot, but those final moments of the game colored a lot of my perception of MGS2 and made me hesitant for the longest time to dive back into its story. Long story short, whether intentional or not, lying can have some major drawbacks to the audience's perception of a game, but despite that, I did respond well enough to the gameplay, to the point where I would end up playing MGS2 a number of times after the fact. However, in each subsequent playthrough, I ended up skipping cutscenes at every turn. For a time, I considered MGS2 the game that I enjoyed most in Solid's lineup, due to how many times I would pick up and play it just for the gameplay. And while I won't say that my actions didn't hold any weight in describing my feelings for the game, as they certainly did, it kinda felt off to enjoy a Metal Gear Solid game without saying the same for the story. And then MGS5 came out and taught me that it was a perfectly valid way to enjoy these games. Nevertheless, for years, the true meaning of MGS2's story stayed out of reach, as it took a lot more thought to properly peel this onion and get the rich nectar hidden deep within. Weird comparisons aside, after playing MGS2 for this video, I realized that I misunderstood the game for years, half of which I already attributed to me being too young to understand what's going on, and the other half I attribute to the fact that this game doesn't allow you to pause its cutscenes. But now that I'm older and I'm much more well versed in the internet, alongside having the ability to pause cutscenes thanks to recording the game footage, I now have a much greater understanding and respect for this game. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time and dive right into it, as we discuss the misunderstood masterpiece that is Metal Gear Solid 2. Our story takes place in New York, where we see our protagonist Snake doing what he does best in infiltrating a passing tanker. Unfortunately, by the time he touches down, his stealth camo goes haywire, forcing him to find some cover as he then gets into contact with Otacon, who explains his new objective. In the years since Solid took place, Ocelot has sold Rex's schematics on the black market, allowing potentially every .com to have their own version of Metal Gear that they can make. Thanks to weapons of mass destruction being a huge no-no in terms of public safety, Snake and Otacon took it upon themselves to form Philanthropy, a non-governmental organization that deals in exposing any and all Metal Gear projects, with this tanker, or rather what's inside of it, being one of those targets. Thanks to some info Otacon managed to hack out of the Pentagon, he found out that the Marines were making an amphibious anti-Metal Gear that is supposed to, quote-unquote, wipe the floor with the other models. We'll get back to that statement later. To get the UN to sign off on the dismantlement, they first have to prove that it exists, and as such, Snake now has to sneak in and get the photos proving that the Metal Gear is real. A simple in and out mission that shouldn't be too difficult, or at least it would have been if it weren't for Russian invaders popping up out of nowhere trying to get their hands on Metal Gear 2. Russians or not, they're nothing Snake can't handle, as he makes his way deep inside the tanker to find the new Metal Gear called Ray. After taking the pictures and uploading them to Otacon, Ocelot and the Russian soldiers file in, holding the Marines' commandant hostage. However, it's not long after that Ocelot does what he does best and betray his Russian allies, revealing that he was working for Solidus the whole time. With as quickly as it takes for me to finish this sentence, Ocelot takes out both heads of the Marines and Russians and triggers multiple Semtex explosions sinking the tanker as he gets ready to hop into Ray. But just before he can get into the robot, his brand new left arm starts acting up, as someone else starts speaking through the old cat. To give a bit of context, Ocelot's arm was cut off by Gray Fox early on in Solid, leaving him one-handed for pretty much the entire game, and with it being hard to man a revolver, at least when it comes to reloading, it only makes sense that he got a new arm. Unfortunately, it also came with a vengeful spirit, as Liquid temporarily takes over Ocelot to taunt Snake before hopping into Ray and ripping the tanker in two, leaving Snake's fate a bit murky. As Ray swims away, Ocelot then gets control back of his body long enough to get into contact with Solidus, telling him that he got photos of Snake while he was at the tanker. Some years later, thanks to the oil spill from the tanker, a decontamination facility called Big Shell was built to prevent any further pollution of Manhattan's harbor. In time, the Big Shell became a landmark for environmental protection, as the government will on the occasion do sponsor tours to help promote the place, with this particular outing having President James Johnson on their clipboard. Unfortunately, that was a terrible idea, as with his arrival, Big Shell was quickly overtaken by a group named Dead Cell, former members of the Navy SEALs anti-terrorist squad, along with a Russian private army, as they now demand $30 billion for both the president and hostages' lives, with failure to comply resulting in the destruction of Big Shell, turning Manhattan's harbor into a cesspool, releasing toxins that will wipe out the bay's ecosystem. While the Navy wasted no time in calling SEAL Team 10, Foxhound however went with a different route and tasked Snake with a solo man sneaking operation to save the president and hostages, alongside disarming the terrorists of any and all explosives. However, due to the fact that the leader of Dead Cell is going by the name Solid Snake, Campbell decides to change Snake's codename to Raiden to try and prevent any and all confusion. However, as Raiden continues on through Big Shell, he learns that he isn't the only one trying to sneak in, as he finds guards thrown all over the place and spots a figure as he rides the elevator. When the elevator comes back down, Raiden takes off his gear to reveal that the man once called Snake isn't the Snake, not to be confused with Solid Snake, who is the terrorist leader. He's just some other dude named Jack with nowhere near the experience of the old hero, but nevertheless, he's the man tasked with the job, and as such, he is our protagonist for this endeavor. This is, or rather was, the main source of controversy regarding Metal Gear Solid 2, as not only did the trailer, box art, and title screen only show Snake with no indication of a second protagonist, but in those trailers, Snake is shown to be in late game areas that you cannot reach as him in the final product. Heck, even when you first hear Raiden, he's doing an impression of Snake's voice and doesn't actually start using his normal talking voice until Campbell brings up his VR training.
And by the way, Snake, we're changing your code name for all following communication.
What's wrong with Snake?
Just a precaution. You are now designated Raiden. All right, Raiden. You've already covered infiltration and VR training.
I've completed 300 missions in VR. I feel like some kind of legendary mercenary.
As I mentioned earlier, I can see why someone would be sore about the false advertising, but at the same time, it's kind of the point. You see, one of Metal Gear Solid 2's themes revolve around information and how powerful lies and simple omissions can be in forming what people think is true. Thanks to those trailers, we're able to see this as early as the plant chapter with the aforementioned Raiden reveal. But it's not just the audience who was hoodwinked, as the game itself firmly believes that Raiden is Snake as well. When reports come in of a man running around in a box knocking out guards, the enemy immediately assumes that Snake is back coming to save the day. And that's only half true, as while Snake is running around knocking people out, the game reveals to us early on that there's multiple people with the codename Snake in this adventure. While I'm not 100% sure on this, I assume that the reason the commercials showed Snake and not Raiden was because they were all framed from the terrorist's perspective, knowing that Snake was running around, but not the Snake, but the man formerly known as Snake, now called Raiden. We even see this in the first boss fight of the game against Fortune, who despite me calling her a boss, is actually a fight that you can't win. But before Raiden reveals himself, she assumes that it's Solid Snake that she's initially cornered, only to be a bit surprised when she sees that she got the wrong person. As a result from this confusion, it brings us, the audience, to the same level as the characters in the story, who for a majority of the cast aren't even sure on what exactly is happening, as MGS2 throws a lot of half-truths or outright lies to the player, as the game then proceeds to ask them what is real and what is fiction. We gained access to gameplay a long time ago, but the complex nature of MGS2's narrative necessitated that I give it a bit more attention. With that being said, the gameplay is now leaps and bounds ahead of what it was in Metal Gear Solid, making for what is probably one of the most shocking glow-ups I've ever seen in a game, especially so for a title that released so close to the PS2's launch window. Despite the fact that the console was only about a year old at the time of Metal Gear Solid 2's release, series creator Hideo Kojima didn't let that stop him from going all in with the design, upgraded mechanics, and weird Easter eggs, creating the most content-rich PS2 game that I currently know of. The first upgrade that will catch anyone's eye, aside from the updated graphics, is the first-person aiming activated by holding R1 and square. Back in MGS1, this wasn't even close to being possible, as you physically couldn't raise your gun when in first person, which wasn't terrible as you could still manage to shoot enemies enemies from far distances thanks to the Soliton radar, but there could be times where you aren't lined up properly, causing you to miss and waste bullets. Here though, unless an enemy moves out of your way at the last second, your shot in first person mode should always be dead on, especially when you use the auto lock function the game has, which is activated by pressing and holding L1. In addition to that, you also have the ability to lean left or right, stand on your toes while aiming, or survey a room while silent up against a wall by pressing either L2 or R2, or both in the case of the tiptoes variant. Heck, when leaning against walls, if you confirm that a soldier is near you, you can jump out and immediately train your gun on them by holding square, making your job all the easier. These are the primary mechanics you'll be interacting with throughout the game, but don't be mistaken, as these aren't your only new tools at your disposal, as you can also hang off ledges and drop to lower floors, hide in lockers, as well as roll and or flip for a fast evasive maneuver. However, to discuss the rest of MGS2's mechanics, we first need to talk about the AI and the numerous buffs it received in transition between games. So, first and foremost, the AI's vision has been drastically increased. While yes, the Soliton radar will show the ranges at which they can see you, the blue cone now represents the range at which the AI recognizes you as the intruder, as it can now see your body from much farther ranges, but will need to come closer to confirm if you're a threat. Once they confirm their suspicions, it will start an alert phase as usual, except this time around the AI goes through a mandatory animation of taking out their walkie-talkies, giving you a little bit of time to either hit them or tag the device to stop the call. Keep in mind, if the soldier starts talking, the commander will send in soldiers anyways to check out the situation. And while we're at it, guards now have periodic checks that they have to make with their commanders, and if they're late, the commander ends up sending in guards in anyways to check out the room, starting the brand new caution phase where more guards file into a room for a short period of time. If you're caught and start an alert phase, instead of a couple soldiers rushing you down, which can easily be dealt with, it feels like the whole base comes after you, as in MGS2, it's physically impossible to fight off all the guards and win, forcing you to run and hide until the heat dies down. While you can transition between rooms to get some breathing room, there will still be an influx of guards in adjacent areas, making your job a lot harder. In addition to this, when you start playing as Raiden, you no longer have access to the Soliton radar when you first enter into a room, as now you need to locate a computer node in order to activate it, making your first time in a new area a really tense endeavor. For as difficult as the AI is to deal with once you're spotted, I appreciate the challenge they now bring to the table, as now there are actual consequences to being found aside from your endgame rank being lowered, giving some stakes to the choices you make while sneaking around. However, there is one change in MGS2 that trumps all the others for the AI, being the fact that their bodies can no longer disappear when dealt with, as they now lay on the floor for another soldier or camera to see. As such, you need to get in there and move that body to prevent another soldier from seeing your handiwork. To do this, simply run over to the knockdown body while unarmed and press square to drag them around, in which case you can use the same locker trick I mentioned earlier to hide them, completely taking them off the field. However, in saying all of that, there are two responses that soldiers will have to seeing a body, either immediately calling it in or kicking them away, and what determines what response they will have are your lethal and non-lethal weapons. So, lethal weapons are standard guns carried over from MGS, being the SOCOM, AK, etc. And as their title suggests, they're used to kill or deal major damage to soldiers, which in MGS2 can be used to take out limbs, restricting their ability to attack or walk depending on how you aim. In addition, thanks to first-person aiming, lethal weapons now have the ability to take out cameras, ciphers, and other mechanical objects thanks to their power. Non-lethal weapons on the other hand lack the oomph necessary to take out machines, and their firing rate ain't too hot either, needing to be reloaded after each shot, while lethal weapons can go until the clip is emptied. However, what they lack in speed and power, they make up for in effectiveness, as non-lethal weapons, specifically the M9, are so strong that you rarely need to switch weapons outside of specific boss fights. The key to the M9's strength lies in the aforementioned responsiveness the AI has to dead or unconscious bodies. As with the former, it is immediately called in, starting a caution phase, but with the latter, no matter how many times an unconscious body is found, even if said body is knocked out right in front of another soldier's face, it will never alert them, making it possible to ignore the part where you have to drag them away and just continue onwards. Now, yes, if you ignore them, there is a possibility that another soldier will kick them awake, undoing the work you just did, but that is such a small penalty in comparison to using lethal fire, where you now put yourself at more risk just to remove one soldier. Because of the M9, I'm tempted to call non-lethal weapons busted thanks to the punishment for leaving bodies around being almost non-existent in comparison to their lethal counterparts. And just so we're clear, this is not an accident, as not only do non-lethal weapons retain a similar strength in 3, Peace Walker, and 4, but it's mandatory to do a no-kill run in order to get the best rank in the game, Big Boss. Honestly, when looking at the weapons with an objective eye, I'm not sure how to feel about non-lethal being so much better than lethal. I assume the idea was that you'd use non-lethal for sneaking around and then switch to lethal when you enter into a boss fight. However, because bosses normally only let you get one shot at them before becoming temporarily invincible, you might as well stick to non-lethal and just aim good. Outside of machines, I personally don't see a reason to use lethal weapons, which to let my my biases show for a minute is fine by me, as thanks to the copious amount of superhero content I consumed as a child, I'm down to let these soldiers live and just go about my business. But at the same time, it sucks, as while going throughout the game, you gain access to much more lethal weapons, which to me only serve a purpose in boss fight, and at that, most of the time, they can't really do anything better than their non-lethal counterparts. In fact, using non-lethal weapons to beat a boss will also give you the added benefit of receiving their dog tag, which when collected alongside the other soldiers in the game will give you access to the stealth camo, which is a cool incentive, but is something that I've never done at the time of writing this. To get the dog tags from regular soldiers, however, you don't need to be as docile or flashy, as in order to receive them, you need to stick them up, which can only be done by walking up to their blind spot and pressing square while in first person. This will cause either Raiden or Snake to say freeze, which will cause the opponent to hold their hands in the air, and in time shake their dog tag loose. But in some cases, soldiers will need convincing, which will require that you shoot their arm or leg with a lethal weapon to let the dog tag loose. Also, I didn't know where else to put this, but lethal weapons can temporarily stun enemies if you aim just above their head where the exclamation point appears and shoot them when they see you at a distance, causing the soldiers to become dazed for a few seconds. You can also do this with a non-lethal weapon, but at that point it kind of becomes redundant, seeing as non-lethal weapons by default stun enemies. But hey, you do you, I guess. Even with all this mechanical complexity that MGS2 brings to the table, the part that I enjoyed the most when revisiting this game is seeing all the small Easter eggs littered throughout the Tinker and Plaid chapters. Whether it be destructible environments, soldiers jamming on their headphones, certain characters being hidden away in the environments, MGS2 has so much going on in just about every room in the game, making it feel even more alive than its predecessor, and with the sheer amount of optional dialogue giving even more personality to the new and returning characters, MGS2 blows everything that came before it out of the water, making it out to be, in my personal opinion, one of the best experiences I've had on the PS2. If there is one thing that I can say that MGS2 failed to hook me on, it's the what-if scenarios from Snake Tales, where the game reconstructs events in the story to make Snake the protagonist of a new adventure, which was created thanks to the backlash the game originally got. There is no voice acting during Snake Tales, nor do you carry weapons over from chapter to chapter, as they're each their own contained story, reusing assets to tell a new narrative. Now, I gotta say, I don't think I ever bounced off something MGS related faster than this piece of optional content. First off, unlike the base game, the Soliton radar is permanently taken away from you, and in addition to that, new soldiers are present at different locations, forcing you to be even more cautious than you would be normally. But that's not all, as for the most part, you're forced to sneak past all of them without the aid of the suppressor for your SOCOM, effectively making it worthless outside of a straight up fight or an area where you need to disable a machine. And even though you can get the M9 in the second chapter, ammo for it is scarce, which will eventually put you in the exact same scenario again. I only played Snake Tales up until the 75% mark of the second chapter, and while it was funny to imagine someone pulling on Snake's ear because he gave his code name when a person asked for his real name, it was hard for me to get much enjoyment out of it, as when I played this, I had just beaten the main story and was a little burnt out, and getting hit with even harder scenarios immediately after that wasn't what I needed at the time. Maybe one day I'll come back and try it again, but I definitely need to be in a different headspace to enjoy this kind of difficulty. So, like its predecessor, most of where MGS2's accolades and confusion stem from are in its story, as this time around, the game focuses its attention on freedom and half-truths, as it asks the question if a person is truly free to decide right and wrong for themselves when living in a society that is constantly influenced by misinformation. The basis of this question plants itself in the, at the time, oncoming digital age, where thanks to irrelevant information and half-truths flooding the internet like crazy, it made it difficult to parse anything worthwhile and grow from it. Unlike MGS1, just about every character in the game interacts with this theme, making for a very interesting, albeit somewhat difficult narrative to follow when trying to keep track of all the truths and lies. There are three major entities that interact with this theme throughout the game, being the man using Solid Snake's name, Solidus, the program trying to control human will, GW, and our unlikely hero, Raiden. Starting off with the former, Solidus is pretty straightforward, simply wanting to give freedom back to the people. Thanks to being a former US president, Solidus has been exposed to a number of secrets that the masses are unaware of, like how the election is staged and that the president is just a figurehead with no power, all of which is done to appease the masses into thinking that they have any power in determining the country's future. This was set up by a 12-man group known as the Patriots, who have, for the longest time, been directing America behind the scenes. While Solidus was president, he loathed the Patriots so much so that he started the whole Shadow Moses incident, sending Ocelot over to convince Liquid to steal Rex, which served as an elaborate smokescreen for him to get the machine's dummy warhead data. Unfortunately for him, Nastasha Romanenko, a member of Snake's support team that I forgot to mention last video, wrote a book called In the Darkness of Shadow Moses, exposing Rex and the Genome Soldiers to the masses, getting the Patriots to force Solidus into resigning and attempt to set him up with an unfortunate accident. Because because Solidus didn't want to die, he went into hiding, acting out his actions through Ocelon until the next president, James Johnson, arrived at Big Shell, where he'd get him to comply with launching the nuke due to James sharing similar frustrations to Solidus. Despite Campbell's earlier claim of him wanting money, Solidus is aiming a bit higher than pocket change, as he plans to set off a nuke right over Wall Street, crippling the Patriots' monetary power and setting a portion of Manhattan free from their control. And in the chaos, he'll slip into Wall Street and build his own version of Outer Heaven, to which he'll call its inhabitants the Sons of Liberty. Yep, he's a big boss imitator too. But he's a different game than Liquid, as unlike his brother, not only is he a perfect clone possessing both dominant and recessive genes, but he actually likes his dad. When Snake finally enters the scene, he yells at Solidus to quit acting like Big Boss. When Raiden shoots out his Harrier, causing him to lose an eye, instead of cursing at him, he thinks of thanking Raiden when he hears that it makes him look more like his father. In addition, he's not doing all this freedom fighting just because he's a stand-up guy, but because Solidus physically can't have kids, as he, Liquid, and Solid had that function removed from birth. This isn't just a fight for freedom for Solidus, it's a fight to leave a legacy, a fight to leave something tangible behind to show that he was here and he did something with his life. Unlike his brother, Solidus is kind of a tragic anti-hero, someone who's trying to do good, but by any means necessary. Unfortunately, that kind of zeal has a lot of consequences, as he is a danger not only to the people on Big Shell, but the very people he's trying to save. This is not the video to discuss this, but as someone who grew up in New York during 2008 when the financial crash happened, I remember hearing a lot of stories of what people were doing to themselves, and it was not a fun time. So I can only imagine that in his attempt to liberate people, he ends up burying just as many as he saves. Before making this video, I actually didn't remember much about Solidus in comparison to Liquid, due to the latter clone being the loudest thing in every scene that he's in, both in terms of volume and personality. Solidus is pretty reserved about his actions and manner of speaking, coming off as bland in my earlier years, but now I view that blandness as a representation of his presidency. He isn't the loudest person with the loudest personality, sure, but he knows just what to say to keep cats like Ocelon and a gun for hire Olga in line, making them come to a truce despite the literal bloodlust one has for the other. In addition, he holds a certain amount of poise that very few characters in the series come close to emitting. I never picked up on any of these things when I was younger, but now that I have some experience with elections and alike, I can appreciate how refined he comes off as in comparison to the band of psychos that is Dead Cell. For as great as he is though, Solidus only makes up a third of what MGS2 is. As to view the other third, we have to look at the primary evil of the series, the Patriots, and their new creation, GW. So, to give a bit of context as to what GW is, thanks to the advent of the internet threatening the Patriots' control over the distribution of information coming into the US, the group decided to put together an AI capable of not only controlling the military's weaponry and an army of Ray units, but can also control the information coming into the country and set it all up in a new Metal Gear called Arsenal Gear. Where is Arsenal Gear? Anywhere on screen where a human body isn't present. That's right, the Big Show was never a contamination cleanup facility, but a huge weapon parked just outside of Manhattan, equipped with more deadly weaponry than you can imagine. But what about the oil spill, I hear myself asking? Well, we also learned that this was also a lie too, as the tanker never actually had any oil on it, as the Patriots set the whole operation up to build Arsenal Gear and frame Snake, who, after Shadow Moses, became a hero in the eyes of the public, and with him and Otacon creating philanthropy, it would be hard to get any more Metal Gear projects off the ground without the UN knowing about it. Just about every piece of important information is quickly dismantled at the revelation of GW's existence, but there is one, technically two more pieces of glass needed to be smashed through, as when Otacon's sister Emma gives her life to upload a virus into Arsenal Gear's system, Colonel Campbell starts getting real loony, becoming unable to consistently hold a conversation without switching topics and sounding much more robotic to boot. Yep, Colonel Campbell wasn't actually Campbell this time around, but GW in disguise, using Raiden's nanomachines to latch onto a memory he had of the Colonel while doing VR missions and mimic his voice. Funnily enough, GW going haywire also has a slight effect on the game, as when you transition between rooms for a short while, the game doesn't display the correct location name, giving many other names in different languages, including New York 52nd Street. And I gotta say, 52nd Street wishes it looked this clean. But that's not all, as GW also copies roads from Raiden's memories as well. This is the part of the game that always confused me, as it stated that the Patriots had placed mental implants in Raiden, preventing him from remembering his past. And with Raiden never actually having met Campbell, I thought it would be a similar situation with Rose, where Raiden met her once and the Patriots brainwashed him into thinking that he was in a relationship with her. It doesn't help that when GW Rose tells Raiden that she's pregnant with his son, that the words lie are all capitalized when she says that he has to believe her, only adding to the confusion. But yes, I'm pretty sure that he and Rose were together before the events of this game. However, the repulsive part about this is that GW took that info and used its rose filter to convince Raiden of doing something whenever he wasn't confident in a task by literally talking sweet nothings into his ear. Regardless, the purpose of GW's lies is to perform one last experiment before the Patriots can be sure that it's ready to go public, wanting to make sure that it can create convincing enough context to manipulate the masses. You see, GW isn't the most convincing liar on the planet. In fact, everything it tells Raiden is almost immediately contradicted by someone else on Arsenal, or even itself at times, which can be as early as the first codec call you make to it.
The hero of Shadow Moses? So that's why you changed my code name.
Right, but he can't be the Solid Snake. He died 2 years ago on that tanker.
Colonel, do you think the terrorist ringleader is really Solid Snake?
Yes, I do.
But during the Shadow Moses incident, Snake was
A hero?
yeah.
Certainly. You went through VR training, but it is not as if the simulation is faithful to every fact. It changes people.
But in order to make sure that it was ready for prime time, the Patriots needed a guinea pig, someone who noticed the inconsistencies but turned a blind eye and followed his orders through to the end, with Raiden unintentionally completing this objective. However, that's not all, as the AI has also gained sentience and gets very personal about its job, having a bone to pick with the trivial information piling up on the web, alongside convenient half-truths that people tell each other to stay politically correct, like be nice to others but beat out the competition. As a result, by creating context, it hopes to spur humans into evolution by deciding for them what truths to leave behind, all the while eliminating the useless information that people regurgitate to one another, destroying free will as it provides the fiction it believes will allow people to think that they're piloting their own lives, forcing America as a whole to dance to the Patriots' twisted tune. For a villain that is only introduced in the final hour, GW, and to a lesser extent the Patriots, are shockingly layered villains covering multiple facets of corruption and cover-ups that Americans to this day are still suspicious of, creating what is, in my opinion, the perfect villain and foil for the land of the free and Solidus as well. That's not even going over the shockingly accurate interpretation of what the internet will become in the future, or predicting that oil spill that happened in the 2010s, albeit the location is a couple thousand miles off, but nevertheless this game's oddly accurate predictions are hard not to marvel at. However, with all that being said, I don't really like either of them as villains, seeing as despite being built up throughout the game, they more or less serve as sequel bait since all the characterization went to Solidus. Which is funny because I think GW might actually have more screen time than Solidus as a whole. With these three out in the open, it's pretty clear that the imagery MGS2 is trying to invoke in its narrative is a radical president fighting against an oppressive government system, both of which will do anything they see necessary to enact what they believe is good for the people. But with that being said, where does Raiden fit into all of this, as the two most important roles have already been filled? Well, it's simple. He plays the last important role in the equation, being a representation of the people the former two are trying to free and or enslave. From the second Raiden stops doing a snake impersonation, we immediately establish who he is as a person in the very next codec call he has with GW.
There's a terminal in front of the elevator. A node.
Did you say nerd?
Not nerd. Node.
Oh.
Raiden is kind of a normal guy, fresh out of VR training and placed on the field in what is easily the most important job he's ever had. As a result from his inexperience, he's, for lack of a better term, very emotional, almost cracking under the pressure multiple times and is easily ridden with guilt when he finds out that all of SEAL Team 10 die tagged as a feint for him. It's a lot for the guy. After all, this is his first real mission, and because of that, he has a tendency to complain about how nonsensically horrific the situation is, fighting people with superpowers all being led by Dr. Octopus. As a result from his first outing, he wasn't, and to some, still isn't considered to be a great protagonist to follow. But that's the point. When Raiden and Snake first meet up, the latter immediately laments the fact that the former is a grunt of the digital age, lacking the experience you get from on-field training. When Raiden encounters Fortune, she is also disappointed that he can't kill her. And in the last hour of the game, he gets constantly ego-checked by GW from getting a false sense of confidence from Snake. MGS2 itself laments the fact that Raiden is the audience's surrogate, hoping that at the helm of the story would be a protagonist that can weather any storm and not be so easily browbeaten by a couple of words. In fact, the game itself admits to wanting to mold Raiden into Snake's image. As told when Ocelot reveals that he was working for the Patriots all along, he clues everyone in that this whole debacle in the Big Shell was to enact the S3 plan, aka the Solid Snake simulation. Actually, GW reveals that S3 stood for Selection for Societal Sanity, but in true MGS2 fashion, Ocelot was lied to by the Patriots. Why? I don't know, just to be consistent, I guess. Anyways, the point of this plan was to test to see if the Patriots can manipulate events as well as they can manipulate people, and it went off without a hitch. After the bombing section with Fat Man, MGS2 blatantly turns into MGS1 as we run through events that closely mimic what happened at Shadow Moses. For example, Raiden fights a Harrier piloted by Solidus, similar to the Hind D piloted by Liquid when he fought Snake. Otacon loses his sister Emma in a sniper fight similar to the way he lost Wolf, and just like how Snake takes on Rex by himself, Raiden goes up against Ray alone too. Actually, that's not quite accurate, as Raiden takes on a whole 10 Ray units at the same time by himself and is able to keep them all at bay. This is the first, but not the last time the series showed that the so-called anti-Metal Gear ain't so hot when compared to Rex, and while this alone is pretty bad, it only gets worse from here on out. However, no matter how much the game itself wants Raiden to be like Snake and being physically capable of doing more than what Snake could pull off, he just can't be like Snake. But if he can't be like Snake, then who is Raiden? Well, that's a difficult thing to answer, as until the endgame, it's a question he does everything in his power to avoid. After being knocked out by Snake and the Ninja, Raiden is captured by Solidus, where he recognizes him as his adoptive son that he took in after he killed his parents when fighting in Liberia. Solidus then goes on to explain how he put a young Raiden to work as a child soldier, where the kid would be given the name Jack the Ripper thanks to his enormous kill count. From how traumatic all this was, when Raiden was snuck out of Solidus' camp, he decided to throw away his past, with the Patriot's cerebral implants helping him achieve that. But now that Solidus went and reminded him of who he was, his memories start flooding back to him. This is also around the time when GW reveals to Raiden the reason for him being chosen for this particular project, which is, aside from his relation from Solidus mirroring Snake and Big Boss, is in essence thanks to a warped sense of reality. From the beginning of the game, MGS2 has made it clear that Raiden is a soldier of the digital age, using VR missions to get him up to snuff, which he claims to be realistic in every way to the point where he can't distinguish between fiction and reality. Because of his willingness to throw his past away and the constant immersion he's at in VR, he's lost the ability to tell fiction from fact, as despite verbally admitting that something feels wrong about Campbell, he can't seem to bring himself to stop following orders, which in turn makes him the perfect test subject for the Patriots since they expect the masses to be in a similar daze thanks to the barrage of information thanks to the internet. However, despite initially being a lost cause, when Raiden finds and starts working with Snake, he actually starts getting a hold of reality and is able to ground himself to some extent. Despite his people skills still being terrible, Snake ends up being an older brother figure to Raiden, telling him what he needs to hear regardless of whether or not he wants to hear it, causing him to grow up a bit in each of their interactions. Funnily enough, despite the revelation that Raiden was a child soldier being a tragic reveal, it's in this moment where he starts coming out of Snake's shadow, as shown later on when Snake gives him Olga's sword, a weapon which Snake says that he doesn't care for, and within minutes, Raiden takes to it to the point where it becomes his de facto weapon for the rest of the game. Although with that being said, one of the most important things that Snake teaches Raiden is about free will and the responsibility they have to the next generation to make the world a place worth living, and as such, use their free will to discern what kind of things they'll leave behind. For his first outing, Raiden may not be the best protagonist, but thanks to Snake, he ends up finding some solid ground to stand on in this topsy-turvy game, which then immediately gets tested as GW tries to beat his newly adopted ideals into the dirt, as it claims that, thanks to his unoriginality, he isn't worthy of using his free will. Having all the data it needs, GW sets up one more fight with Raiden against Solidus. Knowing what he now knows, Raiden refuses to fight his adopted father, but GW reveals that not only do they have the real Rose captured and hooked up to his vitals, but Olga, the new cyborg ninja's daughter, as well. With his hands literally tied and Solidus wanting to kill Raiden and inspect his nanomachines, as he believes that thanks to being in contact with GW, he can figure out the Patriots' whereabouts by inspecting the machines floating around in Raiden's blood. However, despite his ambitions being easy for the pickings with Raiden handcuffed, Solidus gives Raiden the opportunity to seize freedom for himself, as he tosses him a sword which cuts through his handcuffs, as he tells him that the only way for Raiden to truly be free is to strike him down and face his past. If it weren't for Solidus offering Raiden a fair shake at his own freedom, I'd call this fight the most dour final boss in all of gaming, as thanks to the Patriots, Raiden is set up to lose no matter the result. If he kills Solidus, then America loses their greatest chance at freedom and the Patriots continue to run free. But if he does nothing, Solidus will kill him and by extension Rose and Olga's daughter as well. Nevertheless, the two go at it, with Raiden ending up the victor as Solidus spends his last moments reaching towards a statue of George Washington as he then loses his strength and dies. Despite the victory, Raiden doesn't take the time to celebrate, as with the constant trickery and deception, he's left wondering who he really is, which Snake happens to overhear. To make an inspirationally long conversation short, Snake tells Raiden that despite being manipulated, everything he felt on this mission was his, and with that, he can decide for himself what his name, future, and what he'll pass on will be, encouraging him to start a clean clean slate. Raiden then takes this to heart as he tosses some dog tags with the player's name on it, representing that he's no longer a surrogate for the audience, properly becoming his own character. As their conversation winds down, Raiden gives a few parting words to Solidus, saying that he did teach him a thing or two about freedom. As he then asks where Ocelot went, Twitch Snake states that he tagged his runaway Ray with a transmitter, but he won't hold his breath as he assumes the Patriots gave him a false address. Still though, it's not too bad as Snake manages to swipe a disc housing information on the Patriots' true identities. While Snake goes on his way to track them down, he stops Raiden from coming along, saying that he still has stuff he needs to take care of and people he needs to talk to, disappearing into the crowd as Raiden sees Rose just down the street. When Raiden approaches Rose, he asks if she knows who he really is, but she states that she doesn't. However, they will find out together. The game then begins closing on a monologue from Snake, as he states that leaving a legacy is more than passing on your genes, stating that what he'll leave behind is what he's seen, heard, and felt, along with the emotions associated with those things. He then continues on by saying building the future and preserving the past are one and the same, and it's the responsibility of the previous generation to leave whatever life they can behind in full so that the children can see how messy history was and learn from it, ending on that note. However, in an after credit scene, Otacon contacts Snake saying that he managed to crack the code and find the names of the Patriots. However, he noticed that one of their biggest contributors to philanthropy was on the list. But that's not the weird part, as Otacon continues on to tell Snake that all 12 members of the Patriots have already died about 100 years ago, making the mystery even more mysterious. And that was Metal Gear Solid 2, a fantastic game that was well ahead of its time. While I will say the ability to pause cutscenes contributed a lot to my newfound enjoyment of the game's narrative, the overall package is still solid, delivering on quite literally everything its predecessor did and then some, being an excellent showcase of what the PS2 is capable of. And just like MGS1, I think 2 can box right alongside a lot of modern day titles coming out today, and with the controls being less dated than the PS1 classic, it fares much better in that regard too. Still, to many, its controls will definitely feel a bit odd if you didn't grow up with the game, but that's nothing a little bit of time can't fix. After all these years, I'm glad I can now say that I fully enjoy MGS2, story and all. Still, we haven't actually hit my favorite title yet, as that game comes with the very next title, MGS3. Now, honestly, with that being said alone, and considering how much I enjoyed MGS 1 and 2, I think that's saying a lot for this next title. So with that being said, I'll leave it there for now. So with that being said, I hope to see you all in the next video. But before you go, I wanted to bring mention to my Cash App account, Riku0. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring mention to my Cash App account is because this is what I do full time, and I depend on donations to keep funds going. So with that being said, I appreciate any amount given, whether it's $5 or $5 million. I'm grateful for it all, and I thank you for your time in watching this video. So with that being said, I'll see you all next time. Until then.